My daughter-in-law humiliated me, saying, "You disgust me." I just smiled and did something. In front of everyone, she tried to put me down, certain that I would stay quiet. But in seconds, the evidence I had kept for years came to light, revealing her cruelty. What was meant to be my shame turned into the end of the engagement and the beginning of my freedom. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Eleanor adjusted the small vase of violets on the living room table, the same ritual she had maintained for decades. The silence of the spacious house only accentuated the emptiness left by Anthony, her companion of 40 years who had passed away 3 years ago. The walls, once witnesses to laughter and lively conversations, now seemed to observe her with the same indifference she found in her son's eyes. She sat in the worn velvet armchair, the one that still held the imprint of her husband's body, and took a deep breath. Richard had called earlier, saying he needed to talk about something important. After Anthony passed away, her son had grown distant, appearing only on holidays or when he needed money. Eleanor knew she shouldn't get her hopes up, but her mother's heart insisted on believing that perhaps this time things would be different. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. She adjusted her grey hair, smoothed her simple dress and walked to the door. Richard was there, thinner than she remembered, deep circles framing restless eyes that could barely look at her. "Mom," he said with a quick, awkward hug. The smell of alcohol was faint but noticeable. "I need your help." Eleanor nodded, leading him inside. She knew that tone of voice, that posture. She had lived through this scene before. Still, she offered coffee and homemade cookies, the ones he had loved so much in his childhood. "I lost my job," Richard confessed, nervously fidgeting with his cup. "The apartment is 3 months behind on rent and—" "You can stay here," Eleanor said quickly, the words coming out before she could contain them. "Your room is still the same." The relief on his face was evident, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He promised it would be temporary, that he would soon find another job, that he would make up for everything she did for him. Eleanor just smiled, accustomed to promises that rarely materialized. In the following weeks, Richard moved in with more luggage than expected. At first, there was gratitude in his gestures. He helped with small repairs around the house, complimented the food, talked about job interviews that never materialized. Eleanor allowed herself to dream of reconciliation, of recovering the loving son she once had. It was on a rainy Thursday that Kimberly entered her life. Richard introduced her as a friend, but the sparkle in his eyes revealed something more. Tall, with dyed blonde hair and perfectly manicured nails, the young woman examined every corner of the house with a poorly disguised, critical look. "What a charming place," she commented, running her finger over an old picture frame and making a face when she noticed the dust. "These walls must have many stories, don't they, Mrs. Eleanor?" There was something in the condescending tone that made Eleanor shrink. Even so, she smiled and offered her best, homemade cake and fresh coffee. Kimberly barely touched the food, claiming some fashionable diet. "Richard has told me so much about you," continued Kimberly, her smile not reaching her eyes. "It must be difficult living alone in such a big house, isn't it?" Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. There was something predatory in that seemingly innocent question. Richard, however, seemed enchanted, nodding at every word from the young woman, as if he were hearing unquestionable truths. A week later, Kimberly had moved in too. She brought with her expensive perfumes, designer clothes, and an endless collection of criticisms. Eleanor's food was too heavy, the decor outdated, the elderly woman's clothes dull. Each day a new judgment, always wrapped in false concern. "I'm just trying to help," Kimberly would say when Richard questioned her tone. "Your mother deserves to live better, don't you think?" And Richard, seduced by his girlfriend's youth and determination, began to see his mother through her eyes. Eleanor noticed the change in looks, in words, in silences. Her son, who had previously treated her with distant indifference, now watched her with growing irritation. Her opinions were cut off, her suggestions ridiculed. In her own home, she became increasingly invisible. One Sunday morning, Eleanor was preparing lunch when she heard raised voices in the living room. She approached silently, her heart racing. "This can't continue like this," Kimberly was saying firmly. "Look at this place, Richard. It's a museum of old junk. Your mother is stuck in the past." "And what do you suggest?" Richard's voice sounded tired, as if they had discussed this many times before. "I've researched some places." Kimberly's tone softened, becoming almost sweet. "Senior residences, you know, safe environments with people her age. She would have company, medical care. I don't know if she would accept." "She doesn't need to accept right away. We can prepare her gradually. This house is worth a lot. You know, the property is huge. We could sell it, pay for a good place for her, and there would still be enough left for—" Eleanor moved away, her legs trembling, a strange buzzing in her ears. She returned to the kitchen and chopped onions, allowing the tears they provoked to mix with her own. She wasn't naive. She knew something like this might happen. But hearing the plans being laid out so coldly was different from merely imagining them. That night she tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. She thought about confronting them, about kicking Kimberly out, about begging her son to see her again. But she knew none of that would work. Richard was blind, caught in a web that mixed desire, convenience, and selfishness. And she, after years of living in the shadow of her own silence, no longer knew how to raise her voice. It was the following day that Eleanor discovered something that would change everything. Looking for an old photo album in what had been Anthony's office, she came across a folder she didn't recognize. Inside were documents with her signature, a signature she didn't remember making. Loans using the house as collateral, power of attorney forms, papers transferring her financial control to Richard. Her wrinkled hands trembled as she held those papers. The forgery was obvious to her, but probably convincing to any stranger. She sat in the leather chair that still held Anthony's scent and allowed herself a few minutes of pure despair. Then, slowly, she dried her tears and put the documents back exactly where she had found them. That afternoon, she received a visit from Irene, a neighbor who rarely appeared. A discreet elderly woman with attentive eyes, who brought a cake as an excuse for the unexpected visit. "I've seen different movement at your house," Irene commented while sipping her coffee. "Your son came back." Eleanor hesitated, but something in the understanding look of the other woman broke her defenses. The words began to flow, first like a trickle, then like a torrent impossible to contain. She told about Richard's return, about Kimberly, about the comments, the plans to send her away, the forged documents. Irene listened in silence, just nodding occasionally. When Eleanor finished, exhausted and ashamed of her outburst, the neighbor held her hands with surprising firmness. "You know what saddens me the most," Eleanor confessed with a trembling voice. "It's not their plan. It's the fact that he allows— He's my son, Irene. I raised him with so much love, and it's precisely out of love that you can't allow this to continue," replied Irene with a determination that seemed out of place in her frail body. "We need to act." Eleanor stared at her neighbor, confused. "We? Do you think this is the first time I've seen something like this happen? I have resources, Eleanor. I have contacts, and above all, I have experience." For the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt something different from fear and resignation. It was a small, fragile spark, but undeniably present, hope. The days that followed brought a new routine for Eleanor. On the outside, she maintained the same resigned posture, accepting each criticism with a tired smile, pretending not to notice when furniture was relocated or valuable objects disappeared. Inside, something was awakening, a dormant strength that even she didn't know she possessed. Following Irene's advice, she began to document everything. A small recorder, a gift from her neighbor, became her constant companion, hidden in apron pockets, under tablecloths, inside plant pots. The conversations between Richard and Kimberly, always whispered when they thought she was sleeping, were now digitally recorded. "I talked to the real estate agent today," Richard said in one of those night recordings. "He thinks we can get much more than we imagined for the house, especially if we do some cosmetic renovations beforehand." "Does your mother suspect anything?" Kimberly's voice sounded cautious. "Not at all. She's been so absent-minded lately. I think she's becoming senile, you know? Just yesterday I mentioned that senior residence in Pine Ridge, and she just nodded as if she agreed." Eleanor clenched her fists when she heard that. She wasn't senile. She was pretending, following the strategy devised with Irene. Let them believe in her, fragility in her incapacity, while she silently gathered evidence against them. On a Thursday afternoon, while the couple was out, she received Paul Morgan, a lawyer recommended by Irene. A middle-aged man with measured speech and a perceptive gaze who analyzed each document with meticulous attention. Evident forgery, he concluded after examining the supposed power of attorney forms. And there are clear indications of financial abuse here. Do you have the recordings you mentioned? Eleanor handed over the small digital device, feeling simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. The lawyer connected it to a laptop, listening to selected excerpts, constantly taking notes. "Mrs. Eleanor," he finally said, closing the computer, "what they're doing to you is a crime. We have enough evidence for immediate legal action." "I don't want to sue my son," Eleanor replied, her voice trembling. "I just want my life back." The lawyer nodded, understanding. "There are other approaches. We can prepare a strategic revelation, something that exposes them, but still gives you control over the consequences." As they discussed possibilities, Eleanor's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Richard, letting her know that he and Kimberly were returning home with important visitors. The lawyer quickly said goodbye, taking copies of the documents and the original recordings with him, leaving only duplicates on a discreet flash drive. An hour later, Eleanor was introduced to Michael and Elizabeth Vance, Kimberly's parents. The middle-aged couple exhibited the same air of superiority as their daughter, examining the residence with poorly disguised evaluative looks. "Richard told us about your situation," commented Elizabeth, holding Eleanor's hands with fake tenderness. "It must be so difficult managing such a big house alone." "Actually," interrupted Kimberly before Eleanor could respond, "we were thinking of giving special news today." Richard put his arm around his girlfriend's waist, smiling nervously. "Mum, Michael, Elizabeth, Kimberly and I are getting married." There was an explosion of false enthusiasm, forced hugs, and wine glasses being raised. Eleanor felt the world spin around her but kept the smile on her face, playing her part to perfection. "We're thinking of having the engagement dinner right here," continued Kimberly, looking around as if already imagining the decoration. "Of course, with some changes to the environment, and afterward, we'll help Mrs. Eleanor find a more suitable place for this phase of life," completed Elizabeth with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We know a wonderful senior residence, don't we, Michael?" The man nodded, raising his glass again. "A toast to a new beginning for everyone." Eleanor felt nauseous but toasted along, observing the complicit smiles, the exchanged glances, the way they talked about her, as if she weren't present. In her heart, something crystallized. It was no longer just about defending her property or her house. Her dignity was at stake. That night, after everyone had retired, Eleanor found herself alone in the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she washed the crystal glasses that had belonged to her grandmother. One of them slipped, breaking on the floor with a crash. "You can't even hold a glass properly," Kimberly's voice sounded from the door. She was standing there, still dressed, observing Eleanor with a mixture of contempt and impatience. "Let me clean it. You'll end up cutting yourself and we'll have one more problem." "I can clean my own kitchen," replied Eleanor, her voice firmer than she intended. Kimberly approached, bending down to pick up the shards. "You know, Mrs. Eleanor, this stubbornness doesn't help anyone. We're all wanting what's best for you." "My best or my assets?" The words came out before she could contain them. Kimberly's eyes narrowed dangerously. For a moment, the mask of kindness fell completely. "Listen carefully, old lady. Your son is already eating out of my hand. This house and everything in it will be ours sooner or later. You can make the process easier and have a comfortable ending, or you can make it difficult and end up in a public institution. The choice is yours." Eleanor felt the blood freeze in her veins. The explicit cruelty of those words, without any disguise or subtlety, confirmed her worst suspicions. When Kimberly left the kitchen, Eleanor realized that the small recorder in her pocket had captured every word. One more piece of evidence, even more damning than the previous ones. The next morning, Richard formally announced the date of the engagement dinner, 2 weeks from then. The house would be completely transformed for the occasion, with professional decorators, a hired catering service, and a list of almost 100 guests, influential people that Kimberly's parents were eager to impress. "And don't worry about anything, Mom," said Richard with false solicitude. "Kimberly will take care of everything. You just need to look nice on the day." Eleanor nodded docilely, playing her role as a submissive mother. However, as soon as she was alone, she called Irene. The two met at the small cafe 2 blocks away, a simple place where they knew they wouldn't encounter anyone they knew. 2 weeks, murmured Eleanor, stirring her coffee without really drinking it. "Is that enough time?" Irene smiled, a smile that mixed compassion and determination. "More than enough. Paul already has everything prepared. The documents, the recordings, the evidence of forgery. We just need to decide how the presentation will be." Eleanor hesitated. As hurt and betrayed as she felt, the idea of publicly humiliating her own son still tore her apart inside. "Are you sure there isn't another way?" People like Kimberly and her parents only understand one language: public exposure. As for Richard, Irene paused, choosing her words, maybe that's exactly what he needs to wake up. Sometimes we need to fall to learn how to get up. The days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Eleanor watched her house being transformed by decorators who barely disguised their contempt for the old furniture. She saw cherished objects being relegated to storage, family photographs being replaced by impersonal arrangements, vibrant colors invading spaces previously marked by soft tones. Kimberly commanded everything with impressive authority, treating Eleanor like an inconvenient visitor in her own home. Richard, always by his fiancée's side, seemed increasingly distant, a puppet manipulated by invisible strings. One night, just 3 days before the big event, Eleanor found him alone on the porch, drinking silently while contemplating the garden she tended with such care. "Is everything okay, son?" she asked, sitting beside him. Richard took time to respond, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Sometimes I wonder what Dad would think of all this." The mention of Anthony made Eleanor's heart tighten. "And what do you think he would think?" A heavy silence settled between them. For a moment, Eleanor glimpsed in her son's face a flash of the sensitive boy he once was. But the moment passed too quickly. Richard stood up, shaking his head as if shaking off unwanted thoughts. "He would understand that I'm building my future," he said, with a conviction that sounded forced. "And that I'm taking care of you in the best possible way." As she watched him go back inside, Eleanor felt a wave of sadness. What hurt the most wasn't losing the house, the furniture, or the material memories. It was losing her son to greed, to manipulation, to a distorted version of himself. The next morning, Eleanor had a final meeting with Paul Morgan. Everything was prepared for the big day. The evidence organized, the documents ready, the strategy defined down to the smallest detail. "Are you sure, ma'am?" asked the lawyer, observing her with genuine concern. "We can still opt for a more private approach." Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision she had made. For weeks, she had been treated like an inconvenient object, an obstacle to be removed. Now, finally, she would regain control of her own story. "I'm sure," she replied with a firmness that surprised even herself, "some lessons need to be public to be truly learned." The day of the engagement dinner dawned with a crystal-clear sky, almost like an irony in the face of the storm forming in Eleanor's heart. She spent the morning locked in her room, avoiding the frenzy of hired staff invading every corner of the house. She preferred silence, the inner preparation for what was to come. At 4 in the afternoon, Irene arrived discreetly through the back door, bringing a box containing the dress chosen for the occasion, not the beige, graceless outfit that Kimberly had suggested, but a petrol blue model with impeccable tailoring that enhanced Eleanor's still elegant posture. "You look beautiful," affirmed Irene, helping her with the pearl necklace that completed the look. A queen about to reclaim her throne. Eleanor smiled nervously, observing her reflection. Behind the subtle makeup and careful hairstyle, she saw the frightened eyes of a woman who, for a long time, had accepted being invisible. What if he never forgives me? Irene gently squeezed her shoulders. Forgiveness will come when he understands that this is an act of love. A different kind of love than he expects, but still love. At 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. Eleanor strategically remained in her room, following the plan devised with Paul. Kimberly had determined that she would only come down when everyone was present for the big family revelation, an idea that the young woman considered brilliant and that Eleanor would secretly subvert to her advantage. Through the half-open window, Eleanor observed the movement in the garden illuminated by hundreds of decorative lights. Luxury cars parked, women in elegant dresses paraded along the stone path. Men in dark suits conversed in small groups. Kimberly's parents greeted everyone with wide smiles, as if they were already the owners of the property. At 8:30, Richard knocked softly on her door. He was impeccably dressed in a suit that Eleanor knew he couldn't afford with his own resources. "It's time, Mom," he said with a tense smile. "Everyone is waiting." Eleanor nodded, holding the arm he offered. They descended the main staircase together, where they were greeted by a murmur of approval. The living room, unrecognizable under the new decoration, was full. Unknown faces turned to her with polite smiles and curious looks. In the center of the hall, Kimberly radiated in a red dress that revealed more than it covered, surrounded by her parents and a group of friends who laughed loudly at some private joke. Upon seeing Eleanor, her smile faltered for an instant before recovering, wider and falser than ever. "There she is!" exclaimed Kimberly with exaggerated enthusiasm, approaching for a theatrical hug. "Our dear matriarch!" Eleanor accepted the hug with a serene smile, playing her part to perfection. Richard seemed relieved to see the apparent harmony between the two women. The guests, sensitive to the atmosphere, politely applauded. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Michael Vance, raising a glass, "we are here to celebrate not only the engagement of Kimberly and Richard, but also a new phase in the life of this family, a moment of important transitions and mature decisions." There were murmurs of approval. Eleanor felt Elizabeth's heavy gaze upon her, calculating, evaluating, like someone examining a property to be acquired. "Before the official toasts," continued Michael, "our dear Kimberly would like to make a special announcement." The young woman advanced to the center of the room, pulling Richard by the hand. Her smile was triumphant when she turned to Eleanor. "Dear friends," began Kimberly with a melodious voice, "as you know, besides the joy of our engagement, we are all concerned about Richard's mother's well-being. Mrs. Eleanor has been living alone in this huge house since she became a widow, bravely fighting against the weight of years and solitude." Eleanor maintained a neutral expression, despite the growing fury at that distorted narrative. Richard, beside his fiancée, seemed uncomfortable but didn't interrupt her. "Therefore," continued Kimberly, "we made an important family decision. After our wedding, Richard and I will take care of this property, modernizing it and giving it the shine it deserves. And our dear Mrs. Eleanor," she made a dramatic pause, turning directly to the elderly woman, "will have the opportunity to live her golden years with comfort and assistance at Pine Ridge Residence, one of the most exclusive centers for seniors in the country." A murmur ran through the hall. Some guests seemed genuinely impressed with the generosity of the announcement. Others, more perceptive, noticed the evident discomfort on Richard's face and Eleanor's enigmatic calm. "What do you say, Mrs. Eleanor?" asked Kimberly with venomous sweetness. "Aren't you excited to start this new phase?" All attention turned to the gray-haired woman, who remained silent for a few seconds, as if carefully considering the question. Then, with a tranquil smile, Eleanor finally spoke. "Before answering, I'd like to share something special with all of you. A small engagement gift, let's say." Kimberly frowned, confused by the unexpected deviation from the script she had so carefully planned. Richard seemed equally surprised, observing his mother with growing apprehension. Eleanor made a discreet signal, and the lights in the hall dimmed gently. A white screen automatically descended on one of the walls, a technological addition that neither Richard nor Kimberly had noticed, discreetly installed the day before. "I've been keeping these memories for a long time," said Eleanor, with a clear voice as images began to appear on the screen. "I believe this is the perfect moment to share them." The first photographs were old. Richard as a child, smiling with his parents at a picnic; as a teenager, proud beside his first car; as a young adult at his college graduation. The guests smiled, enchanted by that apparent nostalgic tribute. Kimberly visibly relaxed, assuming it was just an emotional maternal presentation. Then, without warning, the photographs gave way to documents, enlarged, perfectly legible, showing forged signatures, unauthorized loans, fraudulent power of attorney, forms. And next, audio recordings began to play, with transcripts appearing simultaneously on the screen. "Your mother is becoming senile. This house and everything in it will be ours sooner or later. Listen carefully, old lady." Kimberly's voice, clear and merciless, echoed through the now silent hall. Then Richard's voice discussing sale values, planning how to get rid of the old furniture, calculating how much they could profit from the property. Finally, a video. Kimberly and her parents, gathered in the house's kitchen, discussing in detail how to convince Eleanor to sign property transfer documents, laughing at the old woman's naivety, planning her removal as if planning to discard an inconvenient object. The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. Kimberly, pale and trembling, alternated between looks of horror at the screen and fury at Eleanor. Richard seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes, his face a mask of shame and despair. The guests exchanged glances, shocked, many already discreetly moving toward the exit. It was at this moment that Paul Morgan stepped forward, positioning himself beside Eleanor. "Good evening, everyone," he said, with a firm and professional voice. "I am Paul Morgan, Mrs. Eleanor Walker's attorney. What you've just seen is only a small sample of the evidence we've gathered over the past months, documenting a systematic case of financial abuse, document forgery, and attempted misappropriation." Michael Vance stepped forward, his face red, with fury. "This is absurd, a ridiculous show to ruin my daughter's engagement." "You are mistaken," replied Paul calmly, removing a folder from his briefcase. "Here are copies of the complaints already filed with the Specialized Police Unit, as well as the expert reports confirming the forgery of signatures on all financial documents. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, as well as Mr. Richard Walker and Miss Kimberly Vance, are being formally notified to leave this property within 48 hours. A growing buzz took over the hall. Elizabeth Vance, pale, pulled her husband by the arm, urgently whispering in his ear. Some guests were already hurriedly withdrawing, while others watched fascinated as the drama unfolded. Kimberly, recovering from the initial shock, advanced furiously toward Eleanor. "You manipulative old woman, you think you can humiliate us like this? Richard, say something." But Richard remained motionless, his eyes fixed on his mother, a mixture of shame and disbelief in his gaze. "Mom, I didn't—" "It's not necessary to say anything now," interrupted Eleanor with a dignity that silenced everyone. "The evidence speaks for itself. This house will continue to be mine, as it always has been. And as for you—" Her gaze traveled over Kimberly and her parents before resting on Richard. "I suggest you start packing." The Vance family retreated amid palpable embarrassment, dragging a dazed Richard along. The few remaining guests quickly said their goodbyes, murmuring apologies and casting sympathetic looks at Eleanor. In less than an hour, the hall that had been prepared for a grand celebration was almost empty. Eleanor remained standing in the center of the room, surrounded only by Irene and Paul. Her body trembled slightly, a reaction to the stress of the confrontation, but her face displayed surprising serenity. "You were extraordinary," commented the lawyer admiringly. "You remained firm from beginning to end." "It was necessary," Eleanor replied simply. Then, finally allowing herself a moment of vulnerability, she added, "But I feel no joy, just relief and concern for my son." Irene embraced her tenderly. He will have to find his own path now. Sometimes we need to lose everything to rediscover who we really are. That night, after everyone had left, Eleanor walked alone through the rooms of the house, now strangely silent after the tumult of the past weeks. She removed some of the more ostentatious decorations from the party, returned some family photographs to their usual places. Small gestures of reappropriation of the space that had been almost usurped. When she finally retired, exhausted but determined, she knew that the most important battle had been won. She had not only recovered her house and her dignity, but also taken the first step to recover herself, the strong and independent woman who, for so long, had hidden under the mantle of widowhood and solitude. The first weeks after the confrontation passed in almost absolute silence. As promised, Kimberly and her parents disappeared completely, leaving no traces except for a few personal items forgotten in the haste of departure. Richard, in turn, temporarily settled in a cheap hotel on the outskirts of the city, calling only once to ask someone to send the rest of his clothes. Eleanor, assisted by Irene and Paul, began a meticulous process of financial and legal reorganization. It was discovered that, beyond the forged documents, Richard had contracted various debts using her name and sold some family jewelry that she kept in a box in the closet. The damage was considerable but not irreparable. "You have the right to criminally prosecute all those involved," explained Paul during a meeting in his office. "The evidence is irrefutable." Eleanor shook her head, contemplating the folder of documents on the table. "I don't want to see my son in jail. The public humiliation he suffered is enough." "And what about the Vances?" questioned Irene, always more pragmatic. "They were the true masterminds behind all this." Eleanor sighed deeply. "Leave them be. Losing access to what they considered a goldmine is punishment enough." The lawyer and the friend exchanged concerned looks, but respected her decision. Deep down, both understood that this choice didn't come from weakness, but from an inner strength that transcended the desire for revenge. At home, Eleanor initiated a gradual process of transformation. Not the violent and disrespectful change that Kimberly had planned, but a gentle and conscious renovation. She donated furniture she no longer used to charity organizations, reorganized rooms to create brighter spaces, planted new flowers in the garden, small changes that symbolized her own rebirth. One morning, while pruning roses in the garden, she saw a familiar car park at the entrance. Richard got out, visibly nervous, holding a small package. Eleanor felt her heart race, but continued her work, letting him take the first step. "Mom," he called softly, approaching cautiously. He looked thinner, his eyes marked by deep circles, his face without the artificial shine that Kimberly had so valued. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Eleanor indicated the wooden bench under the jabuticaba tree, the place where they used to talk when he was a child. They sat side by side, a heavy silence between them. "I don't know where to start," Richard finally confessed, his voice breaking. "What I did, what I allowed them to do, has no justification." "Why, Richard?" asked Eleanor, the question that had tormented her for months. "How did we get to this point?" He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling slightly. "I was broken, Mom. Financially, emotionally. When I met Kimberly, she seemed so strong, so decisive. She had plans, vision. I had nothing. And then you allowed her to treat me like an obstacle to be removed," completed Eleanor, her voice firm but without accusation. Richard nodded, unable to deny it. At first, it was just talk, vague plans for a distant future. But Kimberly, she has a way of making real what seemed like mere speculation. Suddenly, we were forging documents, hiding papers, planning how to sell the house after. He swallowed hard, unable to complete the sentence. "After you sent me to a nursing home," concluded Eleanor. "I let myself be carried away. Each step seemed too small to back out and too big to undo. And then," he raised his tear-filled eyes, "you exposed us in front of everyone." "It was the only way to make you see," Eleanor replied simply. Words no longer worked. Richard extended the small package he had brought. "It's not much, but it's a start. I sold the car I bought with the money from your jewelry. I managed to recover some of them from a pawn shop." Eleanor accepted the package but didn't open it. Instead, she took her son's hands in hers. "What hurt me the most wasn't the money, Richard. It was seeing you transform into someone I didn't recognize." "I don't recognize myself anymore either," he admitted, tears finally flowing freely. "After that night, Kimberly abandoned me. Her parents treated me like garbage. I lost my job because of the scandal. I'm living in a rented room, working as a waiter to pay the bills. But you know what's worse?" He paused, breathing deeply. "The worst is knowing that I deserved every bit of it, that I betrayed the only person who was always by my side, unconditionally." Eleanor felt her heart tighten at her son's genuine suffering. As hurt as she was, as betrayed as she felt, she still loved him. Not with the blind love that allows abuse, but with a mature love that understands the need for boundaries and consequences. "What do you want, Richard?" she finally asked. "What did you come here seeking?" He dried his tears with the backs of his hands, as he did when he was a child. "I didn't come to ask to come back. I know I don't deserve that yet. I came to say that I'm trying to rebuild my life day by day. I came to ask, not for your immediate forgiveness, but for the chance to earn it over time." Eleanor contemplated her son for a long moment. She saw in him, beyond the shame and remorse, a spark of determination that reminded her of the man Anthony had been. Honest, hard-working, resilient. Perhaps, she thought, the fall had been necessary to awaken these dormant qualities. "The path back will be long," she warned, "and it will have to be traveled on your own legs." "I know," he replied with a humility he had never shown before. "I'm willing to try." That afternoon, after Richard left with the promise to return on Sunday for lunch, Eleanor sat on the porch with Irene, sharing the details of the encounter. "Do you believe he has really changed?" asked her friend, always cautious. Eleanor contemplated the garden where new roses were beginning to bloom. "I believe he's trying, and that, for now, is enough." The months that followed brought gradual but significant changes. Richard kept his word, visiting regularly, always bringing small contributions, sometimes financial, other times just his physical strength for repairs around the house, or simply his company on Sunday afternoons. He never asked to move back in, respecting the space that Eleanor had reclaimed. Eleanor, in turn, flourished in her new independence. She enrolled in a gardening course at the local university, developed new friendships, began attending a book club at the neighborhood library. Her house, once a solitary refuge of memories, became a living space, with frequent visits and lively dinners. On one of those nights, as a small group of new friends gathered in her living room to discuss a recently released book, Eleanor found herself observing the scene with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. Among those present was Charles, a retired literature professor who had recently joined the group and whose attentive eyes often met hers with a special sparkle. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, discreetly approaching while the others debated animatedly. Eleanor smiled, feeling an unexpected warmth in her face. "I'm thinking about how life can be surprising. A year ago, I was practically invisible, in this house a silent shadow that everyone ignored. Today you are the gravitational center of this group," completed Charles with sincere admiration. "The woman everyone wants to hear, whose opinion everyone respects." She accepted the compliment with grace, without false modesty. She knew it was true, not because she had become a different person, but because she had finally allowed her true essence to manifest, without fear, without guilt, without the need to diminish herself to accommodate others' expectations. The following week, Eleanor received an unexpected letter. The simple envelope contained just a sheet of paper with Richard's familiar handwriting. "Mom, I received a job offer in Portland. It's an opportunity I can't refuse, a true fresh start, away from the mistakes I made here. Before leaving, I need to say what I may not have clearly expressed during our recent conversations. Thank you for being strong when I was weak. Thank you for showing me in the most painful way possible that dignity is non-negotiable. The humiliation of that night was the price I paid for having forgotten the values that you and Dad always taught me. I'm still learning to be the man I should be. I'm still fighting against my weaknesses. but now I have a north, a moral compass that I lost for some time. I'll come back to visit you whenever I can, and I hope that one day, when you look at me, you'll see again the son you deserve to have. With love, Richard. Eleanor carefully folded the letter, storing it with the family photographs that had returned to a prominent place on the living room shelf. She felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for the physical distance. That would be established. Hope for the path of reconstruction that her son seemed genuinely determined to follow. That afternoon, walking through the garden that flourished under her care, Eleanor reflected on the unexpected journey life had provided her. From invisibility to affirmation, from resignation to resistance, from silence to voice. It wasn't the path she had planned, but it was the path that had brought her back to herself. In the distance, she saw Charles approaching through the gate, bringing a book he had promised to lend. She smiled, adjusting her grey hair with a gesture that no longer carried insecurity. Life, she discovered, didn't end with losses, nor was it defined by abandonments. Life was a continuous awakening of possibilities even, or perhaps especially, when the path seemed darkest. On the porch table, one of the freshly cut roses displayed its beauty in a small crystal vase. Eleanor contemplated it for a moment, admiring how something so delicate could be simultaneously so resilient. How, after the harshest winter, it still found strength to bloom again, just like her. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Eleanor's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here clicking on the left. If you liked this narrative of overcoming and rebirth, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and human relationships. Don't miss